Alright, so what is ableism? I just did two videos where I kept using the term. So now I'm going to explain it even more. So ableism is discriminating against someone on the basis of them having a disability. So if you're hiring for a job and someone who uses a wheelchair applies, and they're still perfectly capable of doing the job, but you choose not to hire them because they're using a wheelchair, that's ableist. That's like not hiring someone because they're a woman, or from a certain background. You would not get away with that. That's racism or sexism. So that's what ableism is. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Um, okay, yeah. So there's a website. I mean, this is the best place I find for examples. Called Not Always Right, which is from the expression "the customer is not always right." Although it now has different subsections, and there's one subsection called Not Always Working, in which it's the employee that's the problem as opposed to the customer. And there are many good examples of ableism in there. One I read recently was a woman in a wheelchair was at a restaurant with a friend, and while the friend was in the washroom, the woman in the wheelchair tried to order alcohol, and the server wouldn't give it to her. She said, "We have to wait till your caregiver comes back. You have to get her permission. How do I know you won't have a reaction?" And this whole thing. Okay, that's a class A example of ableism. You're making all kinds of assumptions about this person, their health, their mental abilities, what they can and can't do, all based on the fact that she's using a wheelchair. Another example of ableism is when people who have disabilities are told they should not have children, that they would be bad parents, that they would be selfish, because people assume they can't do anything. That's a lot of where ableism comes from, is people's ignorance about disability and what people with disabilities actually can do and can figure out. I will say with that example, there's some nuance in that if you're passing on a medical condition, like one person I know of who has brittle bone disease, a very severe case, and he inherited from his mother. And he wishes that his mother had not had children because of he has to live like that now. So that's nuance, but on the whole, saying a disabled person should not have kids is ableism. In terms of myself, I always like to tie my videos into my own experience. Because I'm not physically disabled, I haven't faced much. My one story was a professor in college who told me that I wouldn't graduate the program because I had Asperger's. And not only did I graduate, I graduated with honors. My GPE was 3.8 out of 4.0. So I think she pissed me off into graduating, to be honest. I'm like, I have to show you. Other than that, though, the only other time I have issues, well, this is not directly ableism, I guess, but it ties into it, is the neurodiversity movement. I have a lot of issues with people who want me to love and celebrate my autism instead of, considering it a disability. And that leads into my examples of what's not ableism. Because you hear the word thrown around all the time. Anytime someone is not celebrating a disability, apparently it's ableism. So here's some examples of that. I read an article online written by a woman whose daughter at the time was still an infant, who was born with 3 different brain defects. And the future was quite uncertain, and the mother made a comment that sometimes she's happy that her baby looks like every other baby and doesn't look disabled. And then she went on to say, "I know I shouldn't feel that way because that's ableism. I should be celebrating my daughter's differences." I think I read that about 3 times, trying to make heads or tails of that. Your baby has brain defects, will have a challenging life, will have medical problems, will die young. I don't understand why you have to celebrate that. Why it's bad to say, that you wish you didn't have it. Which leads me to my next example. The CBC in Canada put out a podcast about a boy with a degenerative brain condition, and his father wrote an accompanying article in which he in fact said, "I wish my son didn't have his condition. He's 12 years old, doesn't walk or talk, and so forth." And he got blasted for being ableist, for saying that he wishes his son wasn't that way. So are you getting the picture? It's like the neurodiversity movement. If you're not loving and celebrating and saying it's a blessing and blah, 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 somehow you're ableist. When Stephen Hawking died, someone drew a cartoon depicting him, I'm looking at notes, getting up and walking away from his wheelchair, which got blasted as being ableist, because apparently they're saying that he's better off dead than disabled. The thing is, he would have loved to have gotten up and walked away from his chair. He actually commented that he thought being a brain in a jar would have been easier than living in that body. He was successful in spite of his disabilities, which I would say is the situation for a lot of people. And as someone who just did a video about person first language, I guess it would be wrong for me to say that people are too fussy about language, but I don't know how else to say it. Sometimes they are. I saw a man who has no arms or legs on TV saying that he doesn't consider himself disabled because he figures out ways to do things. And I'm staring at this guy going, there's large chunks of you missing. Like, where does this stop? Where does the language stop? What can you say? What is acceptable? But what is, in my mind, it should be totally acceptable to wish your child wasn't disabled, to wish you weren't disabled. I get flack. I've left Facebook groups because I get flack for saying that I wish I wasn't disabled. I think Christopher Reeve is lucky he passed away before the internet took off, because he made no bones about wishing he could get up and walk. He didn't believe that his accident happened for a reason. And then what makes no sense to me is someone like Michael J. Fox wants to cure his Parkinson's, and no one has a problem with that. So why is it okay to cure some things and not others? That makes zero sense to me. It seems kind of random. I'm going to give you a good example if you want to see a more realistic view of disability, instead of just everything's a blessing, everything's amazing, and I wouldn't change a thing. There's a Facebook page called Noah's Miracle about a boy who suffered a brain injury at birth. And his mother is very realistic about the challenges, the struggles, what she goes through, or what her son goes through. And I wish there was more of that and less of this celebrating. That's not to say that I think that everyone who has a disability lives a horrible life. That's not what I'm saying at all. Like I said, many people with disabilities live happy, successful, fulfilling lives. But it's often, and I would argue, if it's often in spite of, not because of. What I would like to see, this is hypothetical, and I talk about it a lot, in depth, I should say, in my neurodiversity video. I would like it to be a choice. If you're an adult who's deaf, has autism, you're a little person, you're blind, you use a wheelchair, what have you. If you're happy like that, in my hypothetical world here, then you could stay. If you don't wish to live like that, you could, get rid of that challenge. I think that would be ideal because people do have different views on this. And my biggest concern is the people who want everything to be celebrated and not cured have a louder voice. That being said, I'm not saying that I want to eliminate every single difference and disability from society. But I want to eliminate, what my concern is suffering. So I'll use Down syndrome as an example. I've heard adults with Down syndrome say that they find it sad that so many babies with it are aborted. And I've heard apparently most of them are happy with their lives. So if that's the case, that's great. The problem is they are prone to so many medical conditions, some of which can be fatal: heart defects, leukemia, thyroid disease, celiac disease. And there's more I'm forgetting. And the list goes on. And to me, wouldn't it be a great compromise? Again, this is hypothetical. If you could eliminate those negative aspects of Down syndrome instead of eliminating Down syndrome completely. I think that would be a great compromise. I might be attacked and called ableist for that, although I don't know why. I suspect I would. But I think it would be great to live in a world where children's hospitals don't need to exist. And I think eliminating those kinds of problems is a good thing. I think that's a great compromise. who knows what people online might say, but, if you want to call me ableist for thinking that, then I'm ableist. But the reality is, I will advocate to my dying breath for better inclusion and accommodation and integration of people with disabilities into society. So many people with disabilities aren't employed because people don't want to employ them. I would shout myself blue in the face if I could change that. So I think I'm extremely, whatever the opposite of ableism is, I guess. But these are my opinions that you can support disability advocacy and disability rights without celebrating it and calling it a blessing. And these are words I've heard used. These aren't just my words. Um, so I'm going to end this with one more story, and I'm going to put a trigger warning here because it does involve the death of a child. There was a a child in Canada, Saskatchewan, province of Saskatchewan. Her name was Tracy Latimer, Latimer, if you want to Google her. She suffered a brain injury at birth. She had cerebral palsy and a lot of medical conditions. And her father ended her life by placing her in a car in a closed garage and left the car running. And he did it because she was in constant pain. The doctors commented on how much pain she was in. She was about to be undergoing another big surgery, and there was a limit to how much painkillers they could give her because of her problems. So the father did this to alleviate her suffering. He did go to prison. He didn't stay in, it wasn't a life sentence or anything. And there was all kinds of protests when he came out from disability rights activists, including many people who had physical disabilities themselves, saying that the justice system was treating her as if her life didn't have worth because she was disabled. I don't see it at all that way. He did what he did because she was suffering, not because she was disabled. And people can't seem to parse the two apart. I can understand the activists who are disabled themselves, because I'm sure they've been treated like less than for a lot of their lives. I'm sure they have legitimate concerns about not receiving proper health care and all that. But that's not what this case was about. This case was about eliminating her suffering. If he did it because she was disabled, not because she was suffering in any way, I'd have a very different opinion on it. But in my mind, it was a mercy killing. And I'm all for eliminating suffering. Um, I cringe when I hear people talk about immortality, but I love the idea of getting rid of age related illnesses. I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think we can keep differences and eliminate suffering. And we don't have to celebrate disability, is the long and short of this. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now, and thank you for watching.